Hello friends, welcome back to our channel where we bring you the most painful and mysterious stories from aviation history. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps us going and helps us bring you stories that the world should never forget. Today's story is one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in commercial aviation. A disaster so haunting that it shook an entire nation and left scars that remain even today. It's about December 1st, 1981, the day Inex-Adria Aviopromet Flight 1308 crashed into the mountains of Corsica, France. 180 lives were lost that morning, and not a single person survived. This was the very first major crash of the McDonnell Douglas MD-82 series, and to this day it remains the second deadliest air accident on French soil. But beyond statistics, it's a story of ordinary people going on vacation, a crew flying into unfamiliar territory, and a series of misunderstandings that built up into one of the most devastating moments in aviation history. Let's go back to that day. It was a cold winter morning in Ljubljana, in what was then Yugoslavia, now Slovenia. A local travel agency, Compass Tours, had arranged a holiday charter to the island of Corsica. To many on board, this was more than just a trip. It was a long-awaited getaway. Families with children, young couples in love, and groups of friends were excited to explore the Mediterranean's hidden gem. Corsica was known for its beautiful beaches, coastal towns, and mountain scenery. For them, it was supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime. The aircraft assigned to the journey was brand new, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, registered YU-ANA. Delivered just a few months earlier in August 1981, it had logged barely 683 flight hours. Sleek, modern, and equipped with advanced technology for its time, it was considered one of the safest planes in the skies. On board were 173 passengers and 7 crew members, 180 people in all. At the controls was Captain Josip Kunic, a highly experienced aviator. He had over 12,000 hours of flying time. But on this specific aircraft model, the MD-82, he had logged just 188 hours. His co-pilot, First Officer Jože Terglov, had around 4,000 hours of experience. But this was his very first time flying to Corsica's Ajaccio airport. The crew didn't know much about the airport or its tricky mountainous approaches, and that lack of familiarity would soon become deadly. At 6:41 in the morning, the MD-82 roared down the runway at Ljubljana and climbed into the sky. The passengers settled in, chatting about their vacations, reading magazines, or simply gazing out the windows. The flight path would take them across northern Italy, over the Mediterranean Sea, and then toward Corsica. The weather wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. There was a thick layer of clouds and reduced visibility, but no severe storms. For most of the flight, things seemed routine. Everything was calm. But Corsica is not an easy destination for pilots. It's a beautiful island with high, rugged mountains, forests, and dramatic cliffs. Ajaccio Airport lies right on the coast, surrounded on the inland side by dangerous peaks. For any aircraft approaching, the rules were strict. Hold above 6,800 feet until cleared lower, because that altitude was the only thing separating them from the unforgiving mountains below. At about 8:30 in the morning, Flight 1308 neared Corsica. The aircraft was instructed to enter a holding pattern near Ajaccio because of traffic and weather. A holding pattern is essentially a racetrack-shaped circle in the sky that planes fly until cleared to continue. For Ajaccio, the safe holding altitude was 6,800 feet. Below that, the plane was at risk of colliding with terrain. This is where the nightmare began. At 8:44 a.m., the crew radioed air traffic control and said they were inbound. In their minds, they were reporting that they had entered the holding pattern, but the controller misunderstood. To him, inbound meant the aircraft had left the holding pattern and was already on final approach to land. That single word created a deadly chain of events. Believing the plane was safely over water, the controller cleared them lower. The pilots, still over the mountains, began descending to 6,000 feet, below the minimum safe altitude. Neither the crew nor the controller realized the plane was flying into danger. Then the controller gave another instruction: report over CTN. This was a radio beacon located over the sea near the airport. But the crew thought it was somewhere else, inland. They believed they were on the correct path, but in reality, they were flying straight toward Mount San Pietro, a massive mountain standing tall in their path. Minutes passed. The passengers likely had no idea anything was wrong. Some may have been preparing their belongings, excited to land in Corsica. Children probably looked out of the windows, pointing to the clouds, unaware of the danger looming below. At 8:53 a.m., the calm inside the cockpit was shattered by the automated voice of the ground proximity warning system. "Terrain! Terrain! Pull up!" The pilots reacted instantly. They pushed the throttles forward and tried to climb, but it was too late. Only seconds later, the right wing of the MD-82 smashed into the top of Mount San Pietro. The wing snapped off, the plane rolled violently, and within moments, the aircraft slammed into the valley on the other side, exploding into a massive fireball. The time was 8:53 a.m. All 180 people on board were killed instantly. The explosion was so loud that people in nearby villages heard it. A thick column of black smoke rose above the forested mountains. Locals stared in shock, realizing a terrible tragedy had just unfolded. Rescue teams were dispatched immediately, but reaching the crash site was a nightmare. The terrain was rugged, covered in dense forest, and there were no proper roads. Hours passed before emergency crews finally arrived. What they found was horrifying. The plane was gone, reduced to fragments of twisted metal and burning debris scattered across the mountainside. Fires raged among the wreckage. There were no survivors, not even a single soul clinging to life. For rescuers, it was not a mission of saving, but of recovering what remained. News of the crash spread quickly. In Slovenia, entire communities were devastated. Families had been wiped out. Parents, children, couples, all gone in an instant. In Corsica, grief hung heavy as the island mourned the deadliest air disaster in its history. Investigators soon began piecing together what had happened. The black boxes told the story. The crew had descended below safe altitude while still over the mountains. They misunderstood the controller's instructions, and the controller, in turn, failed to confirm their actual position. There were several contributing factors. The crew wasn't familiar with Ajaccio's challenging terrain. Language also played a role. English standards weren't as strict then, and miscommunications were common. Investigators also discovered something surprising. In the cockpit voice recordings, the sound of a child could be heard. A small child had been sitting in the observer's seat during the approach, possibly distracting the pilots at a critical moment. The investigation concluded that the crew bore the primary responsibility for the accident, but the controller was also criticized for not double-checking the plane's location on radar. At the time, Ajaccio's radar system wasn't advanced enough to fully track aircraft positions. The controller wasn't punished. He was simply transferred to another airport. The airline, Inex-Adria, eventually rebranded itself as Adria Airways, but for many, the name would forever be associated with tragedy. As with all aviation disasters, Flight 1308 led to change. Afterward, international aviation authorities tightened phraseology standards. Vague words like inbound were banned, replaced with clear, specific instructions. Approach procedures for mountain airports were revised. Ground proximity warning systems were improved to give earlier and more accurate alerts. Air traffic controllers were trained to always cross-check positions before clearing aircraft to descend. Because of these changes, flying gradually became safer. And though the victims of Flight 1308 can never be brought back, their loss helped protect countless lives in the decades that followed. Even today, the memory remains. In 2007, Slovenia organized a cleanup of the crash site, where wreckage still lay scattered across the mountains. A memorial plaque was placed on Mount San Pietro, honoring the 180 people who died that day. For the families who lost loved ones, the pain never truly fades. For Corsica, the image of smoke rising from the mountains remains a haunting memory. Flight 1308 wasn't just a crash. It was a tragedy that touched families, communities, and nations. It reminds us how fragile life is, and how even the smallest miscommunication in aviation can lead to catastrophic consequences. But it also reminds us why flying today is so safe. Every time you step onto a plane, you are benefiting from the hard lessons learned from tragedies like this one. Behind every regulation, every system upgrade, every phrase uttered between pilots and controllers, there is a story, often written in loss and heartbreak. Friends, this was the tragic story of Inex-Adria Aviopromet Flight 1308. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Have you ever heard of another aviation tragedy that left you speechless? Share your thoughts because these stories deserve to be remembered. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories from aviation history. Until next time, stay safe. And when you look up at the sky, remember, every safe landing is built on lessons learned from the past. Goodbye.